Hello, my beautiful jewels, and welcome back to the Fishbowl with Jade, where we put on our scuba gear, dive beneath the surface, and explore the conversations that people are thinking about but may not always be talking about. Here in the bowl, we challenge assumptions, examine perspectives, and make room for thoughtful conversations without judgment. This is not a place where we tell people what they should think. This is a place where we ask why they think it. So grab your oxygen tank, adjust your mask, and let's dive deep into today's discussion. Recently, I came across a story that had gained a lot of attention online. A woman had tragically lost her pet, and as expected, people from all over social media came together to offer condolences, support, and understanding. Many pet owners shared stories about pets they had lost and talked about the pain that comes from saying goodbye to an animal that had become a part of their daily lives. As I scrolled through the comments, I saw an outpouring of compassion, but there was one comment that stopped me in my tracks. Someone wrote, "People need to stop treating dogs and cats like children." Now, out of all the comments, that was the one that made me sit up a little straighter. Not because it was necessarily mean, not because it was entirely wrong, but because it opened the door to a much larger conversation. It made me ask a question that I think deserves a seat in the bowl. Who gets to decide how someone else defines love, family, companionship, or grief? And just like that, today's episode was born. When we look at how many people care for their pets today, it is easy to understand why some people make comparisons between pets and children. Pets need food, water, shelter, medical care, attention, supervision, and affection. They depend on us. We schedule our lives around them. We worry when they are sick. We rush them to the veterinarian when something seems wrong. We spend money on their care. We clean up after them. We train them. We protect them. Some people buy them clothes. Some people throw birthday parties. Some people have social media accounts dedicated entirely to their pets. Some even refer to themselves as pet parents. For many individuals, these animals are not simply animals living in the house. They are companions, family members, and sources of emotional support. They become woven into routines, traditions, and memories. They are there when people come home from work. They are there after breakups, divorces, illnesses, deaths, and disappointments. They become part of the rhythm of everyday life. So when someone loses a pet after 10 or 15 years, they are not simply losing an animal. They are losing a relationship, a routine, a source of comfort, and a chapter of their life. At the same time, we have to acknowledge another perspective. There are many people who hear the phrase fur baby or dog mom and immediately cringe. For some parents, particularly those who have spent decades raising children, they feel there is a significant difference between caring for a pet and raising a human being. They think about sleepless nights, school activities, emotional development, discipline, life lessons, college tuition, and the responsibility of helping shape another human being into an adult. To them, comparing pet ownership to parenthood feels like comparing two experiences that are fundamentally different. Whether we agree with that perspective or not, it is important to understand where it comes from. Many of these individuals are not necessarily criticizing pet owners. They are protecting what they view as a unique experience that they believe should not be compared to anything else. What fascinates me is that this conversation is often less about the pet and more about the meaning people attach to certain words. Notice how quickly people react to language. If someone says they own a dog, most people don't think twice about it. If someone says they are a dog mom, suddenly opinions start flying. If someone says they have a pet, nobody bats an eye. If someone says they lost one of their babies and they are referring to a cat, some people become visibly uncomfortable. Why? What is it about certain labels that trigger such strong reactions? Perhaps it is because words carry emotional weight. They represent identity. They represent experiences. They represent values. And when people hear those words, they often interpret them through their own life experiences instead of the experiences of the person speaking. Another factor that cannot be ignored is how much society itself has changed. Generations ago, many pets lived primarily outdoors. They served practical purposes. Dogs guarded property, cats helped control pests, families cared for them, but the relationship often looked very different than it does today. In modern society, pets sleep in our beds, travel with us, appear in family photos, attend daycare, and have healthcare plans. Entire industries have been built around pet care. There are pet spas, pet bakeries, pet hotels, pet strollers, pet clothing lines, and pet insurance policies. Some people see this evolution as a reflection of compassion and changing attitudes toward animals. Others see it as a sign that society has become excessive. Neither perspective appeared overnight. They developed over time as our lifestyles changed. I also wonder if part of this conversation reflects the reality of modern loneliness. People are marrying later. Some are choosing not to marry at all. Some are choosing not to have children. Others cannot have children. Families are often spread across different states and sometimes different countries. Communities do not always look the way they once did. As a result, many people find companionship, purpose, routine, and emotional connection through their pets. For someone living alone, a dog may be the first face they see in the morning and the last one they see before going to bed. For an empty nester, a pet may help fill a quiet house. For someone grieving the loss of a spouse, a pet may provide comfort during some of the darkest days of their life. In those situations, the bond often becomes much deeper than what an outsider can see from the surface. Now, let's address something that often gets overlooked. Sometimes, when people say it's just a dog or it's just a cat, they are not necessarily trying to be cruel. Sometimes they are speaking from their own experiences. Perhaps they never had a pet. Perhaps they never formed a strong attachment to one. Perhaps they grew up in an environment where animals served practical functions rather than emotional ones. We often assume people who disagree with us are heartless when, in reality, they may simply have a different frame of reference. Understanding that difference does not require agreement, but it does create room for a more productive conversation. There is also another side of this discussion that deserves acknowledgement. While most people have healthy and loving relationships with their pets, it is possible for any attachment to become unhealthy if it completely replaces human connection. This is not unique to pets. People can become overly attached to careers, social media, relationships, hobbies, or even possessions. The issue is not necessarily the pet itself. The issue is balance. Loving a pet deeply is not a problem. Finding comfort and companionship in an animal is not a problem. But like many things in life, healthy relationships thrive when they exist alongside other meaningful connections rather than replacing them entirely. What struck me most about that social media comment was not whether it was right or wrong, it was the timing. Here was a person grieving a loss. And instead of discussing the grief itself, the conversation shifted to whether that grief was justified. Why do we do that? Why do we feel compelled to rank other people's pain? Why do we decide that one person's heartbreak deserves sympathy while another person's heartbreak deserves correction? If someone loses a pet they loved for 15 years, what exactly do we gain by telling them they should not feel the way they feel? Compassion does not require agreement. We can recognize another person's pain without personally sharing their experience. And perhaps that is the larger lesson sitting in the bowl today. The real question is not whether pets are children. The real question is whether we have the right to define someone else's relationship. We live in a world where people constantly tell others how they should love, how they should grieve, how they should define family, and how they should measure significance. Yet the truth is that family looks different for different people. For some, family is a spouse and children. For others, it is siblings, cousins, grandparents, and lifelong friends. For others, it may include a dog that stood beside them through depression, a cat that comforted them after loss, or a pet that became their companion through years of life's ups and downs. The value of a relationship is not determined by outsiders. It is determined by the people who live it. So today, Jules, I want to leave you with a few questions to carry back to the surface. When does caring deeply become too much in the eyes of other people? Why are we so uncomfortable when someone defines family differently than we do? Why do certain words like pet parent spark debate while the love behind those words often goes unquestioned? And perhaps most importantly, why do we sometimes spend more time judging someone's attachment than simply respecting it? Whether you see pets as companions, family members, children, or simply animals sharing our homes, one thing remains true. The relationships we build matter because of the meaning they hold for us, not because someone else approves of them. Thank you, Jules, for sitting in the bowl with me today as we explored the waters of love, companionship, grief, family, and the many ways people define the relationships that matter most to them. Sometimes the deepest conversations start with the simplest observations, and today's discussion reminds us that understanding someone else's perspective does not require us to adopt it. It simply requires us to listen. As always, the goal here in the bowl is not to tell you what to think, but to encourage you to think a little deeper. Until next time, I'll see you in the bowl on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Good Pods, YouTube, Amazon Audible, and iHeartRadio. Search the Fishbowl with Jade. Thank you for sitting in the bowl with me. Now let's come back to the surface. Stay classy, stay curious, stay ever evolving, and I'll see you in the next dive.